when you do have a buyer under contract, how to manage the contingencies associated with the deal. So we're going to start that in a minute. As soon as Mr. YouTube is ready. Okay, Mr. YouTube. Hello, people watching this on YouTube. We are just going to start live. We're just going to share the presentation, get going with the people in the room. So this is a class on protecting your buyers with contingencies in transactions. And our goal here is to learn how to better have conversations and dialogues with our buyers about contingencies. So we're going to talk about what are contingencies. Okay, what the heck are we talking about here? We're going to talk about the loan contingency, the appraisal contingency, the investigation contingency, and some of the other contingencies involved in a purchase contract to buy a home, and how you should manage them in your transaction. And then as time allows, we're going to role play discussion of these contingencies with a client. Does that sound okay with everybody here? Okay. So what are contingencies? All a contingency is an optional term in the purchase agreement. It's an optional, is not required. It is optional term in a purchase agreement, and it is a protection for your buyer. You have, as buyer's agents, a fiduciary obligation to protect your buyers. These clauses do that. They give the buyer, they reduce the buyer's risks when they buy a home. When a buyer does use these in their contract, they get the power to cancel the transaction and get their deposit back. That's really good, right? Let's suppose they put in an initial deposit of $30,000 on them. If it's $1 million purchase, 3% is $30,000. In Fremont, we got plenty of transactions for $1 million. $30,000 of money. And if something goes wrong and they execute one of these contingencies, they get that money back. That's pretty sweet, right? Okay, let's talk about the loan contingency. When a buyer has a loan contingency in their transaction, they have the right for a very specific number of days after ratification to secure their financing, to get their money in place. What does it mean, ratification?
Approval.
Approval of what?
Financing.
What is ratification? The right of the loan contingency has to do with financing, but what do I mean days after ratification? Or what is ratification?
Signature.
Agreement, after the agreement.
Agreement, what agreement? The
Contract.
contract, that's right. When the contract is agreed to, that's when it is ratified. Before that, it's just an offer. What makes an agreement?
Both buyer and seller agree.
Yes, they both sign it. In contract terms, we call that a meeting of the minds. Okay, both sides sign it. Okay. Now, the thing to understand here is, well, we're going to get to that in a minute. So if the agreement is made, the loan contingency gives the buyer, if they have a loan contingency, a certain number of days. Okay, so the contract defaults to 17 days, but you could change it with your offer. The buyer can change it. Maybe the buyer just does 10 days. In your recent deal that you're about to close, how many days were there for the loan contingency? 10 days. Okay, so at the end of 10 days, oh, I should say before we talk about what happens, it is not an appraisal contingency. No matter what happens with the appraisal, this right runs separate. This has to do with the lender coming back and telling the buyer, yes, you're good. We're going to do the loan. A pre-approval letter that you submit with your offer is not a guaranteed loan. It is a pre-approval. Mr. Buyer, based on what we know so far, we're good. We think you can afford to buy this home. But what happens after the property gets in contract? That's when they look really hard at the buyer's financings. They go through every single line of the buyer's bank statements, every single line of the credit card statements. They look carefully at the history of employment, tax returns, and everything. And they are looking for risk. They are looking for reasons why this buyer might not pay back the mortgage every month. Let's remember, your typical buyer is putting in 20%, 10%. The bank is putting in 80, 90% or more. Who's taking all the risk? The bank. But they don't even get to own the property. They're merely financing it. So they want to be really sure that the buyer's going to pay back, right? So they need time. The offer gets accepted. They need time to go take a deep dive and look seriously at that buyer's circumstances. Are they going to pay it back? Yes.
Contingencies.
That's all we're talking about. That's right.
Binding contract for the buyer.
No,
Does the buyer has choice in those 10 days to say?
not yet. Yes and yes to, okay. Is it a binding? If a loan does get approved after the contingency, right? Is it binding? Only if they complete the purchase. If they complete the purchase of the home, then it's binding. Yes, they have a legal obligation to pay back the lender. But if they don't complete the purchase, that's not binding. No.
So there is a contract which is signed.
For the purchase of the home. Yes. Right.
Bank officer comes and says your loan is approved, but the person who is buying, the buyer, is not interested in the property anymore. Does he have a choice to step back?
Yeah.
Or is it mandatory for him to go with this purchase?
So that's a very complicated question. Let's talk about it in the context of what happens on day 9. Okay. So we're going to talk about that's a great question. But the loan contingency specifically is about getting the loan, and on the deadline day for the contingency, the buyer has certain options. So whether day 10 in the case of our example, on day 10, but it could happen a day before, doesn't matter. On or before that deadline day, which is day 10, the buyer for the loan contingency has 3 options. Number 1 option, waive the contingency or remove it. Mr. Seller, everything's great. Our loan is approved. We're willing to send you a piece of paper saying we are no longer going to make this a factor in the deal. That's one option. The other option is to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Seller, we couldn't get the deal to happen, so we're going to cancel.
Does he have that the loan was declined or?
Technically, yes, but not legally. And we'll get to that. Okay. Yeah, sometimes the seller would demand it, but only in extreme circumstances. So I'm going to get to your question. The other thing they could do is negotiate for more time with the seller to figure out the finance. Okay. This contingency is specifically about the loan. So to answer Archana's question, if the buyer has changed their mind for other reasons, legally, this contingency does not protect them. If the loan is approved within the terms by the contract, the maximum interest rate is not exceeded, they cannot cancel because of other reasons using this contingency. They would need to have in place another contingency. Now, because the seller can come back and say, you didn't have any other contingencies. This was the only contingency in the deal, and you're telling the lender can do the loan. So you still have to buy my house. So the answer is no. But it gets more complicated. So let's keep going, okay? Each contingency is isolated and is removed individually. They're not tied to other contingents, okay? So that's the loan contingency. Everyone understand? At the end of day 10, they can say, we're good. They can say, we're bad and cancel. I couldn't get the loan. Or they can say, we need more time.
Just want to make sure I understood correctly. Even though they get a loan approved, they can still cancel it within the contingency.
No, not with this. Not with the loan contingency. There may be other cancellation rights they have. But if you read the contract, this is not that one. Okay, let me finish, let's keep going, okay? I promise you I'm gonna get you there, okay? Let's talk about the appraisal contingency. This is another right the buyer may choose to put in the contract. This one says, it's not about the loan, it says, Mr. Seller, I'm gonna buy your house so long as an independent appraiser says it's worth what I've offered you, what we've agreed to in the contract. We've agreed to $1 million. So long as an appraiser, an independent third party says it's worth $1 million, good to go, right? The appraisal contingency gives the buyer the right for a specific number of days after ratification to get an appraisal at or above the price of the house. Darwin, your deal is closing. How long was the appraisal contingency?
Same as the loan.
10 days. It's often the same. So at the end of the 10 days, Darwin's buyer had two contingencies to manage. They had to make a decision about the loan and they had to make a decision about the appraisal. So obviously, before the 10 days were up, Darwin ordered an appraisal, or his lender did, the buyer's lender did. Appraiser went out, or the appraiser did a review and said the property was or was not worth the sale price. It was. It was worth it.
Yeah.
The appraiser said, yes, this home is worth what the buyer's paying for it. So that's good. Okay. It is not directly related to loan contingency. They operate separately. On the deadline day for the contingency, the buyer has different options, which we're going to get to now.
So the appraisal contingency, there is a sales price, the listing price. And
Not the listing price. It is not the offer price. It is the ratified contract price. Because there might have been counteroffers. Not if it was countered.
so the final price.
Yeah, the contract price. Call it the contract price.
That's it's valid because he's overbidding the.
I mean, he might be overbidding. That's not always. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Others.
Well, that's a decision he makes. He could choose, absolutely, or counter it back and say, I don't want no appraisal contingency. That's a strategic issue. If you're in a bidding war and you're going to go way over all the other comps and you know it, you're not going to put an appraisal contingency in your offer. Because in that case, you know that'll destroy it because you're not putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak. Okay, so you and your buyer may choose to give up this right. That's absolutely part of the deal. But let's just assume you have it in play, okay? Because nowadays we're writing more and more offers where there is no competition or only one other, and you keep it here always as much as you can to protect your buyer as much as you can. Okay, so what are our choices? We have a lot more choices with this one. Certainly we can say, like in Darwin's case, you lifted the contingency, right? Your buyer lifted their appraisal contingency because it appraised. Right, that happens. That's great. The property was worth, what's the sale price you're at? So property appraised at 720 and it appraised at 720. So that's great. That's an option. Now, if it had appraised lower, Darwin's buyer could have said, I'm sorry, Mr. Seller, it didn't appraise. We're not buying the house. Not the loan, not because the lender said so, but because the buyer said, I want to buy your house. It's not worth what we thought it was worth. The market isn't good. Buy it. I don't want to pay more for the house than what the appraiser says it's worth. That is the buyer's right if they have this contingency. Did you have a question?
For example, the contract price is 500K.
Yeah,
The guy who comes to appraise the property, right?
yeah.
Does he know that the contract price is 500K?
Oh, yes, he does. The appraiser sees the full contract. They appraise, is it worth what the contract says?
Does it really bring the price up to 500 or does it really evaluate it based on what?
The appraisers are professional just like you. They have certain legal standards and they have certain obligations to their industry and to their professionalism. And it happens all the time that they appraise properties low. It happens all the time. Now, is there some pressure on some appraisers by some lenders? Sure, there's some bad behavior that happens, especially racist behavior. I'm going to not appraise it if it's in this neighborhood, but I will appraise it if it's in that neighborhood or this type of buyer. So you get that. But yeah, For the most part, one would hope they would hold the same professional standards as we in this room do. Of course they do, because their job is to say, is it worth what the buyer's paying for it? So they do know. And oftentimes it comes in even higher. They'll say, oh, this buyer got a $10,000 of equity. I'm going to appraise it 10,000 more. Happens all the time. All right. So they can waive the appraisal. They can waive the contingency. They can cancel the contract. They can go back to the seller and say, Mr. Seller, my buyer, you can, as the agent for the buyer, you can say, Mr. Buyer, unfortunately, the appraisal came in 30,000 low. My buyer wants to buy the house. We'd like you to lower the price by $30,000 and we'll do an amendment to the contract, a change to the contract. Would you like that? And the seller's agent says, no. I'd agree at this price. Tell you what, let me talk to my seller. Talks to the seller, comes back to you, the agent for the buyer, and says, listen, my seller really does want to sell the house to your buyer. They happen to meet them at one of the showings. They like them. We'll meet you 50-50, but we've got a backup offer. So we'll meet you 50-50. You will lower the price 15K. You come up on the price 15K and cover the 15K of the shortfall. So that's that option. Happens all the time. Yes.
To a different person.
Getting to that. Another option for the buyer is to go to the buyer's lender and say, your appraiser screwed up. Your appraiser made a mistake. They didn't look at this comp or that comp. And you can actually do something requesting an appraisal review. Okay.
The buyer is requesting this.
Through the agent, to the lender. Yes, it can happen. It's a long shot play, but it can happen. And it happens. I've had it happen.
You talk to the lender, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you do it through the lender because the lender was the person who hired the appraisal. Well, that's a negotiable thing. Usually the buyer, right? The other thing you can do is you can switch lenders and switch loans. It happens. I had it happen just last summer of 2023. I had it happen. The appraisal came in like 80,000 low on a $760,000 purchase price, or maybe it was an 840,000. Anyway, it was crazy low. And my mortgage broker said, I've got another investor. Let me have my other investor take a look at this. They changed ships in the middle of the deal. It was a broker, so it was transparent to my client. They still had the same person on the phone. And my broker said to them, my mortgage broker said, I'm going to put you with a new underwriter, a new lender. We're going to do all this over again. We closed one day late. It appraised at the sale price, and we closed one day late. An $80,000 difference between two appraisers, which takes you two different appraisers, two different lenders. Yes.
Question, can the existing appraisal, which is done already $80,000 less, can he remodify it to make it proper way?
If you do an appraisal review,
Can
but
he-
not proper, you need to get that first appraiser to say he made a mistake. Very hard to do. Appraisers don't ever want to change their assessment. You have to have a real solid line. Like when we had it happen to us a summer and a half ago, we went to the first appraiser and said, listen, first we tried a review. We said, you didn't look at this appraisal. You didn't look at this comp. You didn't look at that comp. And that guy said, no, I can't count those comps. It's too far away. It's a different neighborhood. It's a different house, blah, blah, blah. So we went to a new lender because the lender and the mortgage broker and we agreed that it should have been counted as a comp. So we got a new lender and a new loan, a new loan product. Didn't cost my buyers much different on interest rate. And we had it appraised again. And the second appraiser did use the comp and got to the price. So yeah, all of these games, you work with the buyer's lender on this. There is another solution to this problem. Comes in low. Have your buyer lower their down payment. Let's suppose your buyer is doing 20% down and they're putting in, say, $200,000. But the appraisal came in $30,000 short. So the seller won't negotiate. The buyer wants the house. Instead of getting a new appraisal and coming to the table with an extra $30,000, lower the loan amount increase the loan amount and lower the down payment. So lower the down payment to 170 from 200 and pay a higher monthly payment and finance the difference in the cost. So you can do that too.
The banks are okay with it.
Yeah, they'll charge you mortgage insurance because you're under 20% down. So the monthly payment has to work out for your buyer. but that's an answer without having to go to the time, because sometimes it takes up time to change lenders. It takes time to have an appraisal review, and you may be under the gun financially with the seller saying, I won't give you more time. So if the seller won't give you more time and it's really tight, one other option is to change your financing structure. Put down less, reserve more of your cash so you can pay the difference.
Can they pay more extra down payment to?
Well, if you pay more down payment, you're no, well, yeah. I mean, you don't have to change the structure. If they're sitting on a lot of cash, that's number two. They can pay it all themselves. So let's suppose it's a $30,000 shortfall. If they're sitting on a lot of cash, they can just say, we'll bring the extra 30,000, especially if they have very strong financing. Maybe they're 50% down. They've got a lot of cash. So they put in an extra 30, it's no big deal. They buy the house. That happens all the time as well. No change in financing terms.
These are all different use cases, right? But man, what is our role in this?
Oh, you have a big role to play. You tell your buyer all these options they have. You work with the buyer's lender. What are my client's options? Can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? Right? Remember, you can always negotiate for more time. Why would a listing agent be really flexible about giving you more time?
That you are in contract.
And
They want to get the deal done.
Yeah.
they want to get the deal done. Yes. Who has all the leverage in the transaction after the offer is accepted? The buyer does. Before the offer is accepted, all the power is with the seller. Who are they going to pick? But after the offer is accepted, the buyer has all the power. So when you tell them you want more time, most of the time, they're going to say, they don't have to say sure, but most of the time they're going to go along because they just want to get the deal done. They want their money back. They know if they push back on you, it might mean an extension of the deal. And that means they're going to be out of, maybe have to go back on the market, not get their money. Maybe they need the money as soon as possible. There's a lot of reasons why the seller will usually play ball on this. Okay. Now I want to get to, I have a whole class, by the way. If you go to my YouTube coaching page and to the portal, there's an actual class I teach all about appraisals. It's very about appraisals. So I encourage you to watch it. It'll answer a lot of these questions. We can go into more detail. No, I'm building a library. It's really it's a process. I mean, Mahi just a couple months ago said, you need a class on working with sellers. So I put together a class. Did you watch it? Good. Yeah. Oh, you were there. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the investigation contingency. Now, this gets to Archana's point. If your buyer wants the right to cancel for anything else, not the loan or the appraisal, but any other reason, they change their mind, right? They think there's another house they want. So you have to be careful with that one. The investigation contingency is a catch-all. Now, you will hear other agents in the marketplace call about an inspection contingency. That is not the right language. This is an investigation contingency, and it is encompassing of all kinds of things. For example, physical home inspection, results of a physical home inspection, preliminary title report, seller document delivery, like we talked about last week, neighborhood circumstances, crime, safety circumstances, things we might learn in the seller's report about the history of the natural hazards, things about the property, like property permit history, anything you can imagine, okay, that a buyer would be concerned about is enveloped in this contingency. This is the most powerful tool you have to do your number one job for your buyer, which is to look out for them as if they were yourself. Yes. No, it does not. But this is the answer to your question. If you have a buyer who wants to reserve the right to cancel on day 9, they can't use the loan contingency, but they can use this. So be very, very, we're going to talk about it more later, but this is your most powerful tool in the toolbox. Maybe, but in a non-competitive environment, it's almost always there. Okay. But even in an offer with 2 or 3 other people, you can win with this. No, you do not have to give a reason. However, you must be in good faith. Your buyer cannot be operating in what we call bad faith, because then they could be sued for dealing in bad faith. The contract says you can be sued if you don't behave honestly and in good faith in the contract.
Due diligence.
Well, it's more than due diligence. It's where your heart is at. If your buyer goes into this property, writes the offer and accepts it, but they still want to look at other houses, that's bad faith. You do not send them properties to look at after they get into contract. Okay. And you certainly don't want them looking around. If they send you an email saying, hey, I saw this on Zillow, you need to have a different conversation with them. Do you really want to buy that house that you just wrote a non-contingent offer for? Because if the seller were to find out that you were interested in other properties, they could sue you. Okay.
Basically, this current property and not the other things.
You've accepted an offer. You're in contract. This is why getting into contract is such a big deal. And remember, this is fair. Why should a seller commit to one buyer, tie up their home, if that buyer isn't serious? It's a huge cost to the seller if they have to go back to market. They might have to get a lower price. So they want buyers who are serious about buying their home. That's why it's a big deal. This is the most powerful tool. You want this in your deal so that your buyer can cancel, because buyers get cold feet. Let me tell you what happened on a deal of mine years ago. We were in our inspection contingency period. We went to do the home inspection. We were on site, and the neighbors, next door neighbors, had a loud barking dog and were fighting and yelling. My buyer saw this right there and then and said, Stephen, I don't want to buy this house. Right in the middle. We were there with the home inspector. Now, my home inspector, very nice man. He only charged her $100 or something, and we canceled. And I told the listing agent, I'm really sorry. We were at the property and this happened, and my buyer didn't want to have anything to do. I told the listing agent we had a problem with the neighbor. Stuff happens. But if your buyer, you want to have the conversation before you get into contract to make sure they seriously are committed to buying this house, because they're putting in a deposit they could lose, even if they cancel without a. Now, it is true that you are not obligated to tell the seller agent, you don't obligated to tell the seller through their agent why. You don't have to tell them why. But there is professional courtesy here. I have to remarket this property. I'm the listing agent. We were in contract and you're canceling on day 10. Tell me what happened. Well, the best agents will be pretty straight and honest with you and say, listen, my buyer took a look at it and they see that they now have to put money into the roof and into the furnace and into the electrical, and they just decided it was just too much. I use that one a lot. It's a reason. Give the other guy some rope. He's got to go back on the market. If you're the listing agent, you're a listing agent, right? Are you still on the market? Yeah. You're a listing agent. When he gets an offer, if the buyer's going to bail, he needs something to tell his client. He needs something to go back to the market and tell other buyers. Because you're a buyer's agent and you see the property is back on market, your first question for the listing agent is, what happened to your first buyer? Another common one is a financing contingency. They bail because they couldn't get their loan. It's fine. Okay. But my point on this one is, even though you're not obligated to give a reason, try to find a plausible reason to share, even if there isn't one, with the other agent. Don't tell the agent on the other side something that would make them suspicious about your buyer's intentionality, because then you put your buyer at risk. Okay. Don't lie. Okay. Anyway, so what happens? The buyer day 10 comes. Okay, contingency is due. The buyer can say, everything's great. Our home inspection matched your home inspection. We've looked at all the reports thoroughly. My buyer, they were great. They sent me 50 questions about the disclosures. I went through all of them with them, and they are so excited to be buying your home. We're ready to, your client's home. We're ready to lift the contingency. Here's the paper. But they can cancel. And if they cancel, they get their deposit back, which is great. They can say to the seller, Mr. Seller, when we did our inspections, the home inspector said we should get a chimney inspection. And then when we did the chimney inspection, we don't have the report back yet. So we need another, and there was some problems he told us about. We need to look at that report. Can we have another 5 days, please? Always ask for more time in this, especially if the extra time will not change the closing date. That's another way to think about it, right? You can say to the listing agent, listen, good news, we're still on track to close on time. However, we need a few more days for our investigation contingency, or any of the contingencies. whenever you're talking to the agent on the other side, always give them some good news to go with the bad news. It really helps. Mr. Seller, great news. We're ready to lift the loan, the investigation contingency. We're ready to lift the appraisal contingency. Got the paperwork ready to go. We do need an extra week for the loan, unfortunately, because the lender is having trouble reaching the buyer's employer, and we've been really working hard to get a hold of the employer, but we need to verify employment. So we can't lift the loan contingency just yet. But I'm very optimistic that we'll have that for you in a week from now. So you always try to give good news with bad news. Good negotiation, right? Anyway, you can, with this investigation contingency, go to the seller and say, listen, Mr. Seller, we did all our researches and we found out that this home needs a new furnace because this furnace is all rusted out on the inside, according to our inspector, and he says it could fail any day now. And we got a bid. We're sharing that with you right now. Here's the bid from the contractor, a reputable local contractor, for $7,000 for a new furnace with the new ductwork that we need. We would like you to give us a price reduction of $7,000, or we would like you to give us a credit against our closing costs, my buyer's closing costs, for $7,000. Which way you do it depends on circumstances and your buyer's needs. You discuss it with the buyer, you decide which way you're going to go. And then you have a negotiation about that. Some sellers will say, sure. Ultimately, let me take it to the seller. Seller says, sure, and you're done. Some will say, don't need new ductwork. Just the furnace alone is fine. We'll give you 5 or 3. And you have a whole other mini negotiation happen, right? But somewhere either you negotiate a concession or a credit. The other thing you have an option here is to say, Mr. Seller, this furnace needs to be replaced. We expect you to replace it before close of deal. That is the only way we proceed. If you do agree to that, we will then lift the contingency. And it becomes a change in the terms of the deal. By the way, all this renegotiation stuff, the seller is not obligated to agree to anything. That's why we need these contingencies. So that if the seller doesn't agree, your buyer has options to walk away. All right, there are a couple other contingencies I want to talk about. One is sale of buyer's property. You will have buyers who currently own their own house, and it may or may not be on the market. They need to sell their house and get the money from that to pay for the cost of the new house. That's called the sale of buyer's property contingency. The buyer has the same options. They waive the contract, the house is sold, they have the money. They cancel the contract, we couldn't sell our house, we don't have the money. Or they negotiate for more time. Okay? They get their deposit back. With all of these contingencies, if they use them, they get the deposit back. But there are some monies that buyers pay out in a typical transaction they never get back. Does anybody know what they are that are not part of the deposit? Non-refundable costs of buying a house, whether you cancel or not. Yes. The cost of the appraisal, the cost of inspections are out-of-pocket expenses to third parties. They are not refundable. So when you go to a house and you do a home inspection and a pest inspection on behalf of a buyer, and then you do a foundation inspection because if the inspector found something, you might be $1,500 down now as a buyer. If you cancel, you might get back the $30,000 deposit. You will not get back the $1,500. Your buyer has to understand that. To be really clear, these are non-refundable charges.
Question.
Yeah.
Yeah, for single family house, you definitely want to do like for foundation or like the roof, right? But for the like townhomes with HOA, do you also like suggest your buyer to do the foundation inspection?
Not usually. Not usually because the foundation is the responsibility of the HOA.
Also,
And there should be documentation in the HOA documents if there's a problem with the structure. There isn't always though, and sometimes there's bad surprises. But when you're buying a condo or a townhouse, the buyer doesn't control the roof usually, and they certainly don't control exterior or foundation. They only control the space between the walls or the walls inside their unit. So you don't normally ask for it. But it's a good question. And sometimes you can't find out the quality of the buildings. A single family home built in the 1960s, you almost want to inspect the foundation even though the 1960s, they had good foundations, but it's still 65 years old, right? But in a condo that's from 1960s, we don't inspect the foundations. Nobody, and there's no one that's probably ever looked at them in the last 65 years. So, unless the HOA has done an assessment, you don't really know. But if there was a foundation problem with the condo, it would be shared among all the owners. Your buyer would not be exposed to the whole cost. All right, there are a couple of other contingencies I want to mention. Nowadays, we might have a separate contingency for getting home insurance. You might have an offer where you write it and you waive all the contingencies with the offer except home insurance, because the home is near a fire hazard zone and the cost of insurance is not clear and you're worried it might be $10,000 a year. And your buyer doesn't want to buy the house because if it comes in too high and he can't get a good rate. So you can make that a contingency. Another thing is review of the seller documents. This should always be a contingency when the seller doesn't have a disclosure package. Like we learned last week, if you get a package that doesn't have disclosures in it, you want to have an investigation contingency and certainly incorporate a review of seller documents. And it's in the contract. It's a separate line item. And if there's an HOA, always have the HOA document review contingency. It's also one of the standard contingencies. And you should always check that. Make it the same length of time as your general investigation contingency. Make sure your buyer has a chance to review the HOA documents, of which there are a lot, right? You've got the budget, you've got the reserve study, you've got the CC&Rs, like the legal documents for the condo. You've got the last year of minutes of the meetings of all the board of directors. You've got the insurance declaration that the condo has insurance for the structure. There's a lot of condo documents. So you want to make sure. So again, the same thing. Yeah.
About the insurance contingency, you said there has to be a specific amount of insurance if you do not want to pay more than that
Well,
premium.
if you have the contingency, you're worried about how much insurance will cost. So the buyer has to be able to get an insurance policy that they're willing to pay for. If you have that contingency, you're basically saying to the seller, one of the contingencies of this deal is that I can get affordable insurance. Now, what is affordable? That's up to the buyer, right? I mean, I have a listing right now where I got an insurance quote for $6,000 for the year, which is super high because it's located near an open space and there's a risk of wildfire. $6,000 for a house, ridiculous. Anyway, so how do you manage these contingencies? I just wanted to give you guys a few tips about this. First of all, before you write the offer, talk to the buyer and talk to the buyer's lender about how many days you should use for each one. When Darwin was writing his offer, I guided him on this, as his mentor did too. Should he do 10 days? Should he do 17 days? Should he do 5 days? And what should be for each one? We talk about this. This is one of the biggest things we have to figure out with our buyers. We want to write a good competitive offer like Archana was talking about. There is an argument to be said that a seller should not even accept a non-contingent offer, but I shouldn't even have said that. But there is an argument, a liability issue. You want to give your buyer, it's like lemon laws. There's an argument that if you insist on a 3 or 1 day contingency, you give the buyer more time to cancel if they are going to cancel, and that's less likely the buyer is going to sue you or you're going to have a buyer that bails. Anyway, that's a whole other argument. If they write a non-contingent offer and they find out something else after. Yeah, I know, but they'll still sue. I know. Well, fair is another thing. You could sue for anything. If they can show that the seller willfully did not disclose, then they wouldn't have written non-contingent because the deep disclosure package would have told them. That's the argument. Anyway, sorry. Before you write the offer, talk to your buyer, talk to your lender for the buyer. How many days? You want to keep them as short as reasonable for your circumstances. You don't want to make them long because it'll make your offer less attractive. Darwin knows this because we talked about this. You want something about your offer to be attractive, and if you're going to have contingencies, keep them as short as manageable and as appropriate. The lender may say, listen, this buyer's getting down payment assistance, they're getting money from the state is notoriously slow, we need 30 days for the loan contingency. I've had deals like that years ago, not recently. The next thing is consider how competitive it is. If it is not competitive, if there's no other offers or only one other offer, do not be so free and easy with your buyer's contingencies. Look out for them as if they were you. Protect them, protect them, protect them. They can always waive them later, no matter how good the seller disclosure package is. Be very protective yourself of your buyer's rights. That's your job. Okay. But if there's 10 offers, there's a lot of pressure to write non-contingent, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Remember that contingency deadlines, the 10 days or whatever it is based on calendar days that cannot end on a calendar day. Must not end on a non-business day. So we start counting day one. Day one is the day after ratification. So if the deal is ratified today, Tuesday, then Wednesday's day one, we start counting. Day 10 is maybe next Friday, I would think, right? So if day 10 is next Friday, we're known to have a problem. It's not a holiday day and it's not a weekend. But let's suppose day 10 was Saturday. The contingency would automatically be extended to Monday, unless it's a holiday weekend, in which case it'd be Tuesday. Okay, so buyers inadvertently sometimes get more than the number of days they bargained for because the calendar works out that way. All contingencies, all contract deadlines, the day one is the next day, but all endings cannot be on non-business days. Yes. Sorry? It's counted. It only is not counted if it's the end day. Okay, so let's suppose you ratify on Wednesday, right? You get into contract on Wednesday. Thursday is day one, Friday is day two, Saturday is day three, Sunday is day four. We count them. But if we end up being Saturday being day 10, the deadline day, we push it forward to the Monday. You can't have contingencies or closings, by the way, expire on a non-business day. Does that all make sense? Okay. If you are confused, talk to your mentor or me and write your buyer up a deadline chart as soon as you get into contract, so they know what to expect. We'll get to that next. Remind your buyer of upcoming deadlines. Do not call them on day 10. Okay, today's the day. No, warn them. Warn them 3 days before. Hey, just a reminder, we're going to have a conversation on Zoom on Friday about your contingency. We do have to make a decision by Friday. Don't be one of these agents that doesn't perform on the deadline day and have the conversation with the listing agent. Okay? Be that agent. Get ahead of potential problems through communications with all parties and consider when to advise the listing agent of any issues. You may want to tell them right away. You might choose strategically to tell them at the end when there really is still a problem, because you may want to bring them in and have them help you troubleshoot the problem, or you may want to think to yourself, I can fix this so it's not a problem before the deadline, and in which case, why alarm them? So that's a big decision. Now, it isn't in here, but what happens if day 10 comes and goes and you, the agent for the buyer, take no action?
Send them 3 days action.
No, so you're on the right track. You're thinking as a listing agent,
Oh,
right? What actually happens if the listing agent does nothing? What happens to the buyer's obligation? So the buyer had 10 days. It is now day 11. I'm a listing agent. I've heard nothing. I've heard nothing.
Expires.
Huh?
Expires.
No, it does not. The contingency lasts until the seller forces the hand. And they force the hand, they force action by sending something called a notice to perform. But until they send that, the buyer can just extend it out as long as they want. Don't play that game. That's unprofessional. You're not going to be that buyer's agent, okay? It doesn't serve you well, and it doesn't serve your buyer. It creates uncertainty and bad faith all around. So don't be that person.
they have to do the completion of lifting of the.
You do one of three things. You either lift the contingency on the deadline, you cancel the deal, or you go to the seller and say, listen, we're not going to be able to lift the contingency today because of A, B, C, and D. We are going to send you an extension of time addendum, an amendment to the contract, basically. We need another week. Right? And the seller can agree or not agree at that point, but that is far better than not communicating at all. Okay. Now, where is it? Here it is. Okay. I want to talk about non-contingent offers because this comes up all the time. Remember, you have a fiduciary duty to look out for your buyer. Okay. That we've talked about a lot. When you're talking to them about multiple offer scenarios, you should always talk to the buyer about keeping these contingencies. And you should never tell the buyer, remove your contingency or your offer won't be accepted. You never want those words to cross your lips. Never, not that way. It should always come from the buyer, ideally in writing, but at the very least, it's the buyer's decision. Mr. Buyer, I really strongly recommend you have a contingency for investigations. The seller provided all the documents, but you've told me yourself you didn't have a chance to read them yet. Now, there are 7 other offers. If you write non-contingent, you are taking a big risk that you're going to find something when you do read them, and that is going to hurt you, and you're not going to want to buy the home. But if your offer is accepted because you wrote non-contingent or because of the price or whatever, but you have a non-contingency, the seller could keep your deposit because you don't have any right to get it back anymore. Well, you can talk to them about the implications for the seller, but Mr. Buyer, I don't want you to do that lightly. If you're going to do that, you need to understand what it means. So, Mr. Buyer, we are going to attach the non-contingent offer advisory to your offer. Okay? And that's this one. It's a 1-page form, and it's called the non-contingent offer advisory. Sorry, let me move this out of the way. The non-contingent offer advisory, it's in zip forms, it's signed by the buyer. You actually do not have to include it with your offer, but I think it strengthens your offer. I think a seller who sees this knows that you've had the conversation or is led to believe you've had the conversation, which makes you a stronger, more professional looking agent and more likely to get the offer accepted. It tells you that it tells the buyer the risk of writing non-contingent, that they could lose their deposit. And it puts it into writing for all the contingencies. So for the loan contingency, a loan contingency allows you to cancel the contract without penalty if during the contingency period you cannot obtain the loan specified in the agreement. Without this contingency, you cannot cancel if the loan is declined, whether through your fault or the fault of your lender, which basically means, Mr. Buyer, you have to buy this house even if your loan doesn't come through. Right? It's pretty scary. So that's why you want to go through this with your buyers. And for the investigation contingency, an investigation contingency allows you to examine the property and matters pertaining to it. If you give up your investigation contingency, you could lose the right to cancel based on information you later discover, which is why it is important to conduct an investigation early. However, even if you make an offer without an investigation contingency, or you remove that contingency, the seller may still be obligated to disclose to you material facts about the property. In some cases, once you receive that information, the law gives you an independent right to cancel for a limited period of time. The seller cannot not withhold information. So let's suppose the seller did have to do a new TDS because they learned something about the neighborhood that might affect, that would be the exception to this whole rule. That's what they're talking about there. Okay.
So by signing this document, the buyer loses all his rights.
No,
They
by
can
this is an advisory. This document tells the buyer the implications of giving up their rights, giving up their contingencies. They still have contractual rights. The seller still needs to perform. One element of seller performance is disclosing everything they know about the property. So the contract has performance on both sides. Okay, and it's called ratified when it's signed, but it's not a complete contract until it's executed. It's executed when your buyer gets the keys, when it records at the county. Actually, not the key delivery, recording, right? Right? So the contract does have obligations for performance on both sides. These contingencies are buyer protections that are built into the contract that the buyer can choose to not have or not have. This form is an advisory. It's like a statement to your buyer. Yes, buyer, you cannot use these. Here's the implications. Okay. Very powerful tool. I think that's it. So the bottom line, guys, is you have an obligation to your buyers to look out for their interests, and I expect you to do that. We expect you to always be looking out for your buyers and discussing with them the pros and cons of each of these things. So we have a few minutes. We're going to do a role play. Who would like to be the agent? Archana, you get to be the agent. You are going to be the agent. And Ben, you be the buyer. And Archana, what I would like you to do is you're having a meeting with him. He's looking at writing the offer. Explain the investigation contingency to him.
Talk about entering this as a contract and submitting it as an offer to our seller. However, I wanted to chat with you about your rights of putting in contingencies to protect your interests. There are various different kinds of contingencies. There is loan contingency, there is appraisal contingency. The most powerful of them all is the investigation um, contingency, where you have the choice of putting an offer. Even after it gets accepted, you can investigate the property in terms of any questions, doubts you might have. If it is in a what kind of zone, if the condition of the house is perfect, if the disclosures given by the seller are accurate. So it encompasses all of these open items and questions you might have, which you will be investigating after you put your offer. And it will protect you and it will give you the right to basically not execute the contract if you see issues with the property. So, do you have any questions for me? And we can certainly talk about, based on the condition of the house, how old it is, the duration of this particular contingency.
Okay.
So this is what I wanted to tell you in terms of what are your options, and we can take it forward with any of the questions you might have.
All right, we're going to stop there. Great. I thought you did a great job. She missed one thing. You did great. What is, anyone know what one thing she didn't say that would be really important for him to know? Just one thing. Deposit. Jesse has it, the deposit. What you have to tell him is, Mr. Buyer, if you do have this contingency, and let's suppose, God forbid, we find out something bad and we decide not to buy the house, you get your deposit back. That's the power of it. By not having this contingency, your deposit, you wouldn't be able to get it back if you found out something bad after the fact. So this protects you, Mr. Buyer. We really want to have this. So you did great. Okay, but next time add that in, okay? The money. All right, Darwin, I'd like you to work with Jesse's the buyer. You're the agent, and you're going to explain the appraisal contingency to her before you've gotten the offer. You're about to write the offer. So talk to her. Let's just talk to her about what happens if it appraises low. Okay, so talk to her about the appraisal contingency, and let's presume you're not going to waive it, right? Or at least not. I mean, just talk to her about it.
Hi. Yeah, I want to talk about the appraisal contingency. We are have a lender, and on day 10, actually we I asked the lender, and the lender said we should put like 10 days loan contingency and appraisal contingency. So on day 10, the appraiser will come over and appraise the property. If the appraiser, if the result meets the contract price, we should be okay. But if it's lower, and you probably need to pay out of your pocket to how to say, yeah, to make the different differentiation. And otherwise, if the appraisal value is higher, then you are getting a good deal. So that's basically the appraisal contingency is. And if it's too low and you don't have enough money to cover the difference, and we can back out of the contract and get our deposit back.
Okay, I'm going to stop there because of time. So I think you did okay. I think there's there's some room for you to improve it. Okay, so what I would like you to do next time is when you're talking to a real buyer or role playing this with somebody, is don't jump to the conclusion of what she should do, but give her all the options. So, Mr. Buyer, there's always a risk that the appraiser won't see the value, right? So the whole idea, I would even back up further, especially the first time buyer. The appraisal is an effort by an independent third-party company to make sure that the price you're paying for the property is fair. So I would start there, because they may not even understand what the heck is an appraisal, right? It's an idea that an independent third party is going to go look at the house and say this is a fair price, right? Now, this could go a number of ways, Mr. Buyer. This could either be they say, yes, the price we're in contract for, and Darwin did this, the price we're in contract for is accurate. It's fair. Not accurate, but it's fair. So if they say that, that's good. We just keep moving forward. You're going to get your keys. We're excited about that. But it could be that they don't. It could be that the appraisal comes in low, less than the price. Now, the good news for you is that we still have options. This is where I would like you to do this next time. We still have options, Mr. Buyer. And I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that she has to bring the money. Okay, here are your options. First option, if we have this contingency in the deal, you can cancel. You can basically cancel and get your money back, the deposit back. Not the cost of the appraisal, but the money back. That's option one. Obviously, we don't want that. You want to buy this house, but it's an option for you if that happens. Our second option is we can negotiate with the seller to get them to pay it, or at least part of it. If the seller won't pay at least part of it, you also have the option of putting in the cash, okay? And then we also have another option, two options. We can go to the lender and have the appraisal be reviewed if we think the appraiser made a mistake. Or we could even see about getting you a whole new loan, asking the seller for more time. Now that's risky. The seller may not want to give us more time, but we could ask for more time and get a new lender and get a whole new appraisal from someone else.
Basically, not in the down payment, reduce it that much.
Oh yeah, I didn't even mention that. But it depends on the buyer. If the buyer is a 3.5% down FHA buyer, you're not going to be giving them that option. But if you have a buyer at 20% down or even 10% down, they could go down to 5% down. They could go down from 20 to 15 and get more cash available. It depends. If you're talking with a buyer with a lot of cash, you may not even go there, but you could mention it. Yeah. The point is, Darwin, don't put options in her mind that she should choose. Give her the whole options and let them choose. All right, we're out of time. If you click on this link, I will send you a PDF of this presentation. So please feel free to check on this link. And if you want to hear this whole conversation again, it is on the YouTube, my coaching page on the YouTube channel for you. And it will ultimately be on the portal as well. All right. Thank you guys, everybody. I am going to end the YouTube. Thank you for watching if you were on YouTube. And let's go there. Oh yeah, stop this. Thank you, people watching.